Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. My name is Yusuf Ismail. I'm an attorney, a debater, and a public speaker. At least 2 years ago, I was a regular on ITV doing a program called I Beg to Differ, which focused on interactive debate on socio-political, cultural, and indeed religious issues contemporaneous to South African society. Well, this past week, as you've noticed, we haven't been dealing with that, but we've been tackling issues which in fact, focus on something else, and that is unpacking Islamophobia and looking at some of the misconceptions and, of course, theological controversies that exist. And what better day to do it today within Christmas Day being allegedly the birth of Jesus Christ. 1.2 billion people, in fact, celebrate the birth of Christ. And we're going to look and tackle and unpack some of these issues surrounding the birth of Christianity, birth of Christ for that particular matter, over and above the discussion that we have today lined up in store for you. Joining me have been some world-renowned scholars, but tonight I have a special guest, and this is someone that I've always looked upon as fondly. I last spoke to him about 4 or 5 years ago. His name is none other than Sheikh Aqil Onque of Raddu Shubahat, otherwise known as Refuting the Doubts. Aqil Onque was born and raised in New Jersey and became an avid student of knowledge as a late teenager. He studied and taught beginners Arabic, Tajweed, Islamic beliefs and practices to new Muslims extensively. He has studied with esteemed scholars in California at the Zaytuna Institute, where he completed an intensive course on the Arabic language. He's traveled to Mauritania and was privileged to continue studies under some of the most eminent Islamic scholars in the area. He's currently an active member of the local masjid, where he conducts seasonal courses on Arabic and Islamic beliefs and practices. And he's based presently in New York City. He's an avid debater. He's debated on Islamophobic channels like Aramaic Broadcasting Network with some of the noted Islamophobes out there. It's my privilege to introduce Sheikh Aqil Onque to the platforms of South Africa on ITV and Salam Media as well as CI. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Aqil. How do you do?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh Yusuf, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, it's been some time. It's been quite some time since we last spoke to each other.
I think the last time we talked,
I want to start
the program on our channel, on Raddu Shubahat. I think that was the last time we had a meeting together.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, I believe. I can't even recall what the topic was. Well, we're going to focus on that. I mean, you've got this background. Well, what I find, and I want to put it to you, is that at this particular juncture, you've got a small group of conservative foundations, wealthy donors. They are the lifeblood of the Islamophobia network in America, and they kind of support the central nervous system, which in fact consists of a clutch of misinformation experts. You've got people like, Frank Gaffney from the Center for Security Policy, David Yarushalmi from the Society of Americans for National Existence, Daniel Pipes, Robert Spencer, Bridget Gabriel, Pamela Geller, Steve Emerson, and then of course you've got the online platform. What I want you to do, Aqil, in your elegant format, if you can probably unpack for us the prime motivator behind the Islamophobia industry. What are the backers? Who is behind this? What's the underlying motivation? What's the rationale? And what's the end-term goal and agenda? Over to you, Aqil.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen, wa la udwan illa ala zalimin. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah ala ni'mat al-Islam wa kafa biha ni'ma. Alhamdulillah ala ni'mat al-Islam wa kafa biha ni'ma. Alhamdulillah ala ni'mat al-Islam wa kafa biha ni'ma. In looking at this phenomenon of Islamophobia, I think that Muslims, we need to gauge it from also analyzing the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I want to try to draw the parallel of what we're dealing with today and also what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was dealing with during his lifetime. But I think when we look at Islamophobia, we have to look at it from 2 points of view. One, there's a concentrated effort of people who are against Islam for their own reason, and they fund and fuel the fear of Islam in a society to accomplish their aims. So you have a concerted effort knowingly to instill fear of Islam amongst the masses. And I think this has also two folds. One is politically, and also one economically. And we find actually both of these elements during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. And then there's another type of Islamophobia, which is more with the general people who really are ignorant, who don't know, but they take their cues from these people and they end up following them without really knowing much about Islam. These are the people that we're really trying to reach, the ignorant masses who hear these tunes from the powers that be that present this, promote this Islamophobia. The people that really promote it, I think, and many Muslims try, but we're wasting our time trying to convert these people. They have some very sick hearts, very dead hearts, and the job of the Muslim and Muslim activists or Muslim apologists or whatever phrase we want to use for Muslims who are trying to give people the true perception of Islam is that we really should try to appeal to the ignorant masses who are taking their cues or taking information from these people, these think tanks who are against Islam. Now, when we look at Islam, when it first come to the Meccans in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came with a message that radically turned upside down the status quo, politically and economically. And even though at that time the Arabs wasn't very political, but there still was a type of political understanding or environment that existed that they didn't want to kind of, as we say, shake the boat or rock the boat. When the Prophet Muhammad came, the Arabs, they worshiped many gods. And the gods was a means of their revenue. People travel far and wide to come to Mecca to visit and pay homage to the gods and take what they consider to be barakah, blessings, or something from the Arabs in that area. So when the Prophet Muhammad comes with this idea, this radical idea to the Arabs of there's only one God and everything else is batil, everything else is falsehood, and this message of La ilaha illallah, that there's no deity, there's nothing worthy of worship except Allah alone. That means all of your false gods that you have in and outside of the Kaaba that people come to give homage to, you have to do away with it. Which means now that this message would come and take over and upset our social status. And now we lose our authority in being the caregivers of this house or this sacred place that people come to pay homage to, and we have to hand it over to this man Muhammad who's coming with this radical message. If we look in parallel to that in today's society, Islam poses a very similar threat to the status quo. Take, for instance, gambling. Islam is completely against gambling. Gambling is a multi-billion-dollar business in America and the West. If you take and accept Islam as a mainstay in society, that means that we have to do away with all of our gambling habits, all the money, all of the revenue, all of the things that we generate from gambling. It becomes obsolete. It's out the window now. Take alcoholism. If we accept Islam as a status quo and being something that we can use to govern society by, then it means all of the money that we make from alcoholism also have to be thrown to the wayside. And many things like this. So Islam, it comes and it poses such a serious political threat to society, this society, the Western society, because it's in opposition to many of the moral strongholds that this society have kind of departs from. 20, 30 years ago, when the American society, at least or the Western society, was more inclined to a Christian idea, Christian foundation, a lot of these things also was kind of like black market. They were under the table. But when they become and adopted this idea of secularism and separates the church and state, we don't have to apologize for having our secularism oppose our religion. Your religion is your religion. Keep it in the closet. Don't bring it in the open. You go to church on Sunday, that's fine. But secularism is its own beast. And we don't mix this with our religion. We go pray to God on Sunday to repent for all of our sins that we commit from Monday to Saturday. And this is now how they view society. So prayer, which everyone will agree that it's a positive thing, it's to be kept in your house. Don't bring it to school. Don't bring it in the open. Don't bring your morals and your religious views to the open. Let us live our society on the political front as atheists or secularists as we wish. And if you want to go to church on Sunday and ask God for forgiveness, we can do that. Islam doesn't separate from church and state. Islam is the total package. And when we instill Islam in our lives and we live by it, it governs every aspect of our lives, both the secular aspect as well as the private aspect. And this is a big problem to the status quo here. So the people who know about Islam, they know the truth of Islam, they know the history of Islam, they know what Islam has to offer and what it's done in previous societies. They know that if America or the West take Islam as a valid form of expression of their life, it upsets a lot of what they have built so much into to establish, to have a very secular society. And again, we mentioned whether it be alcoholism, whether it be prostitution, whether it be gambling, whether it be many of these things where, although it's immoral, it generates revenue for the society that they don't want to do away with, interest and the like. Imagine taking interest out the Western society. You have absolutely nothing. And Islam is opposed to all of these segments of their society that they know that if we allow Islam to take a stronghold and people see it for what it is, we're going to have an uphill battle against establishing these things that we have in society that brings us all of our money. And in the secular society, in the capitalist society, where capitalism is the essence of livelihood, we have a problem. We have a big conflict of interest between capitalism and Islam. So the same way the Meccans seen that getting rid of all of our gods is an economical threat that we're not willing to give up and we'll fight to the death for it. The same way the Western society has against Islam. But back then, they were more outward with it. They were more overt against Islam. They didn't care about political correctness. And, we will go to war with you, we'll fight you, we'll kill you. We'll do anything to save our gods. The Western society don't put it that way. They don't say we'll do anything to save our gods. They want to just make Islam look so bad that people will see it as what it is, and we can attack it if we don't have to defend our gods. Let the Muslims defend their religion. So they kind of put the onus of burden, the onus of proof upon us. The burden of proof is on the Muslims to say that we have what it takes to give you a flourishing society like we've done in the past, but because they have stigmatized Islam with all of these negative concepts and what's the word looking for? Things that's against Islam. Now, because of that, Muslims have an uphill battle in just getting to the truth of what Islam is for the people. But it's a constructive effort. It's done intentionally to make Islam look bad so that we know that if Islam ever takes root in a society like this and become a stronghold, the society will be radically different from what it is now. And I think that this is very similar what we see from the Meccan society as well. When we look at how they attacked Islam, very similar to how they attacked the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They called him names. They said bad things about him. They lied against him. They did, and it's the same thing now. And this is where I think you have, you go from one phase to the next. You have, for instance, like these online clowns that come, that's fueled by the likes of Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller and all these people. They're fueled, they finance, they're backed by these people, and they put these people who are very unprofessional, people who don't even have a job, unworthy bums, if you may, to go be the face of antagonism against Islam. You know, why is it like such a issue? And why must you insist on making fun of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Like, why do you need to fight for a right to antagonize and criticize and make fun of and insult the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Why? Because this is how they will begin to desensitize people against combating Islam. When you want to go to war with your enemy, you first dehumanize him. You first get public opinion against them, and then it becomes easy for you to attack them and do whatever you want against them because now public opinion is against them. So when society at large sees Islam as a negative thing, as a barbaric thing, as a backwards thing, as a thing that's coming to upset, your modernism and take you back to the 7th century. Now people are against it. And they bring up all of these negative things, try to highlight and say, see this and see this and see this, misrepresenting what Islam truly is, but they give us such an awkward picture that by the time they finish, people don't want nothing to do with Islam. And it's the same way that the people did with Mecca, with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They knew who he was prior to the Nubuwwah, before he became the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But they went against their own better judgment and their own history with him and began to call him all kind of names. He's a liar. He's possessed. He's a magician. He's a soothsayer. He's this, he's that. But just yesterday, he was Al-Amin. He was a trustworthy that everybody in the environment went to for counsel or to take a man or a trust with him to give them their possessions. But now when he comes with a message that will turn over what we know to be our status quo, we would antagonize him in the worst way, even though it's against what we know about him from the past. So I think, Muslims, is important for us to look at the parallels between how society today or any time and how society at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam dealt with trying to eradicate the truth that he was bringing and make it look as if something is not. And Allah mentioned in the Quran, that say, do you dress up the truth with falsehood? Like this is, you know the truth, but you dress it with falsehood to give people the wrong impression so they won't accept it. And I think the Muslims, we have to see past this. We have to see all fronts, the conservative front where the backers, the people like you mentioned, the Robert Spencers and other people who are being backed by think tanks and financial institutions to continue to promote antagonism against Islam, as well as the clowns who are on the surface just like the puppets. People like David Wood and Sam Shimon and these people, Christian Prince. These are online personalities that actually sparked me to come online and create my channel, Uradu Shubuhat. So the Muslims, we have to see it for what it is. And if we do that, then our approach to it will be a bit different. We as Muslims, we should not get upset and enraged and become and act in a way as if we're not Muslims. Rather, Allah gave us a strategy. Allah mentions in the Quran, says that indeed you will be tried, you will be tested in your wealth and in your lives, and you will hear much. You will hear much from the people who was given a book before you and the mushrikeen and those who commit shirk that will harm you. Much, you will hear it. So you will hear attacks against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You will hear name calling. You will see mocking. You will see cartoons, all the stuff. But what Allah says, He says, but if you are patient, وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, then this is from the greatest of matters. This is from the strongest of matters. This is min azbat umur. This is from the area that you have to be strong in your spots. And it's upon Muslims, individuals, as well as upon Muslim leaders and apologists and all those to educate our Muslim population about what Islam is, who the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is. And once this is accomplished, then what we hear won't harm us as much because we know our deen. We know what we believe. No one can come and tell us anything negative about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when we already studied his seerah from beginning to end, and we know who he was. We know what he done. We know the transformation he brought to this Arabian society in the 7th century. Once you know this and you know this about him and you see his life, no one can come bring you some isolated incidents in history and have you begin to doubt your faith or doubt your belief and trust in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for us, it's imperative for us to have knowledge about this. And Allah mentions, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. You have to know that there's no God but Allah and that Muhammad Rasulullah. But knowing this means it entails you have to have study, you have to have some type of energy to build yourself a foundation, and then you rest. And nothing can come and can shake your ground. I've heard maybe every single thing people have thrown, and because, alhamdulillah, I was fortunate to have studies in Islam and about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I have not heard anything that caused me anything other than to bring the truth to these people. But I get many phone calls, I get many messages, I get many comments of people saying, well, what about this? And how about that? And have you heard this? And you seen that? I mean, from clowns, the likes of people who are saying, it's okay, it's Christ-like. I just seen something recently. It's Christ-like or it's Christian-like to mock the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was an online Facebook program that they said that it's okay, come mock Muhammad with us. Invite people to come mock Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, this is their approach. And for us Muslims, we don't play the dozens. We can't say, okay, you mock Muhammad, I'm going to mock Jesus alayhi salam. I'm going to mock Musa alayhi salam. I'm going to mock your prophets. No, because those prophets, the true prophets in the Bible, are also our prophets. So we defend them, we don't mock them. So we can't play the same game with them. We have to just bring them the truth. But these people, what are they after? People like David Wood who don't even have a job. And now with social media, you can monetize anything. The guy will monetize his family business and make money off it. And he makes thousands upon thousands of dollars every month off YouTube doing what? Mocking Islam. This guy,
thank you for that.
He's a lunatic. It's a different case. He admits it. He don't care because I'm going to get paid with no qualifications, no credentials, no nothing against about Islam. I'm going to just go mock and make fun of and make videos and become rich by mocking Islam. SubhanAllah.
SubhanAllah. Thank you for that, Aqil. Thank you for that kind of general overview, and it was a very concise and succinct overview. I think one of the points which come out from it is that, for me, the most important thing when you draw the parallels with the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that, from what I can see, because of the fact that Islam does not adopt this position of relativism, where you, for example, have this demarcation of having your mosques and then having your houses and having your work separate, and the fact that it essentially integrates itself in all aspects of society, not just simply on the moral aspect, but even in terms of how, for example, people regulate their lives, how people regulate governments. It makes it's a worldview as opposed to religion in a conventional sense, like Zoroastrianism or, for that matter, Christianity. It seems to me that, Brother Aqil, that then the Islamophobia industry is by and large fomented by the secular elite. I mean, I just looked, for example, at a report between 2008 and 2013. And the report showed, and this I believe was published by one of your major organizations, CARE, and CARE, the Council for American Islamic Relations, pointed out that apparently between these periods of 2008 to 2014, ACT for America was one of 33 anti-Muslim groups that had access to more than $204 million in revenue. That's the equivalent of R1 billion, or more than R1 billion in South Africa, in South African terms, if you do the conversion. And that amount of money is there just simply pushing for legislation targeting Muslims. I mean, I believe Bridget Gabriel has been one of the founders. The point being made is that why is it that it's a secular, from what I can see, it's a secular elite, the political establishment, together with obviously then Zionist entities, and then, of course, the far right, amongst both the Christian far right as well as those that are of no religious value, form this kind of systematic, synchronistic alliance, and therefore target Islam. And they are armed financially to the hilt, something which we as Muslims don't have to counter that, other than, of course, voices like yourself and lone voices out there and groups that are trying their best to confront this bulwark of hate and antagonism that you see around you. Your comments on that?
Well, I mean, give thought to this double standard. The propaganda. You hear push now, this word, right? Sharia. It's almost like the boogeyman. It's gonna get you, So look at how this society now has made this word Sharia such a negative word. And when you hear it, you think that, the 7th century Arabs are coming to take over your society, saying beware, fight to death, But when you look at Sharia historically, first from the Muslim perspective, and then through society as it developed, much of the legal system and many legal practices and many legal things, as a lawyer, was actually adopted from where? From Islamic Sharia.
Absolutely.
You look in, public places, saying, they have the statue of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They have some of his words, carved, in the instructions, because then they recognize the value of what this man brought and the practicality of his system, and they implement it into society. There's no idea of separation of church and state. There's no idea of give the Caesar what's Caesar and give the God what's God. We say, Kulu lillah. Everything is for Allah. Allah is the all-knower. He knows what's best for us. He gives us guidance in all of our matters, and our home matters and our public matters. So we go to God for guidance in everything. Mm-hmm. But these people, they don't want God in these other areas, because if we put God in it, it takes away our economics. We can't imbue God into our secular life, because God does not fit. God, we look at God as being a moral reality, a moral presence. And in capitalism, it's basically survival of the fittest. There's really no morality there. Do whatever you want to do. There's no rules. Don't bring God into this. We can't be moral capitalists, because if that's the case, then we got to be Muslims. So
it wasn't. If I may ask, Aqil, it wasn't always like this in the United States. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I mean, from what I can recall and remember, in the 80s, and then going back even further down to the 70s and then the 60s, and the McCarthy era and so on, it was always a cold threat. It was always the propaganda. I mean, I made the point with a guest yesterday that if you look at some of the early anti-Vietnam movies like Rambo and so on in the 80s, you'd find that the bad guys are always the Reds, the Soviets, and you'd find, for example, he'd be even siding with the Mujahideen and so on and so forth. Yes, so in terms of
the movie Rambo was a clear. I mean, they were funding, and the Afghanis were heroes.
Yeah, they were the heroes. And then you see in popular culture, that was manifest in Hollywood. I mean, it was always a red thread. I think the Islamic idea was kind of latent, but it was more Oriental. Like, for example, the classical movies of the 60s or the 1920s with Rudolph Valentino and so on. But you then see a shift in the late 90s in popular culture, for example, even in terms of movies like. From what comes to mind, Executive Decision, or there was one with Denzel Washington, The Siege, where in your city, New York City, the bus bombings, I think that was prior to 9/11, just a few years before 9/11. But what actually caused this shift? It seems to me people always talk about 9/11 as being the turning point. But for me, it appears that it was actually the Gulf War of 91. After the Gulf War of 91, and when CNN basically kind of gave us what we would view as infotainment, suddenly the Middle East was alive all of a sudden. You had this threat, even though Saddam was a secular Ba'athist, he was by no means an Islamic representative of the Islamic worldview. And then subsequently, in mainstream media and popular culture, the new threat, which is now replacing communism, which kind of went into oblivion after 1990, and now this came as a new bogeyman, a new replacement. What was the psychology leading to that? I mean, it seems to me that these global events, Gulf War I, and then of course the subsequent events during the Clinton administration, essentially gave rise to all of this. Long before 9/11, people assumed 9/11 was the kind of the precipice where things changed, but it was actually before that, from what I can see, that the perception was already changing, and the stereotypes were being changed towards Muslims.
No, I agree. I think quickly, 9/11 was like the catalyst by which now we can go against Islam. Like, we've done our job. We demonize them. Look what they've done to us. We can go against them now, kind of like full blown, without anybody coming against us. But you mentioned the Gulf War, which is a very important point. It's interesting. There's also another scholar. His name Bilal Phillips, and Bilal Phillips was staying in Saudi at this time, and he got banned from Saudi Arabia because what was happening is that he was actually doing a lot of da'wah to the troops that were coming there. That they kicked him out. They told him, America put pressure on Saudi. He had to go because he's converting too many people. Thousands of American troops that was stationed in Saudi Arabia began to become Muslim because now they're actually in the culture. They see it. And before that, you Muslims overseas in the desert, that's your business, no problem. But now we come into contact with you, we're building a base in your holy land, and we're getting an acquaintance with you unlike before ever in the past. At the same time, we're picking up on global media. The computer is picking up and it's becoming showing, you can see things instantaneously now. So you can see society in real form, in real time, unlike the past. And when now, Islam wasn't a threat or a global threat as it was now, then as it is now, because of global communication. And now we have more interaction with the Muslims, and people are beginning to see that this Islam really is appealing.
Yeah.
And if we realize this is actually appealing, what's going to happen when people start accepting this? So now they become a concerted effort to, we got to combat this. And the threat, the red threat, the Soviet is no longer really a threat. Because even with Saddam Hussein was also America's friend when they wanted to go and overthrow Ayatollah Khomeini. They funded Saddam Hussein. The very weapons they're looking for, they know, or at least they thought they was there because they gave it to him. You gave him the weapons to fight Ayatollah Khomeini to get rid of him. And the Shah of Iran at that time in the 80s. So we know you have something because we gave it to you. And there was no problem. We gave it to you. You was our friend. We funded you. But now we need to take it back or make sure you don't have it because you was our friend now, but now you're our enemy. But when global communication began to become more prevalent, and you can see things in real time with online activity, and now America is actually stationed in Saudi Arabia, and you're getting a glimpse of this culture and seeing the Kaaba and seeing and hearing the adhan, unlike ever before. Being in Afghanistan, or even being in Iraq, is different from being in Saudi Arabia. So because of this reality now, we have actually opened up the door to Islam, and now we get to close it. And it was a serious effort for them, to close this door. And how they do that? They shift it. Yeah, Russia is no longer really a threat. The real threat now is terrorism. As if the Muslims are any more terrorists than anybody from the American Secret Service or anything like this. But this is the image now we have to give to the people, because we can't let them see Islam for what it really is. Sure. This is why the people do it again. Always draw a parallel. During the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, they said people would walk by Mecca and they would put cotton in their ears. They would put things in their ears so they would not hear his message. Don't let people hear the message, because if they hear the message, they're going to be affected by it. This is, this is practical measures to not hear the message of Islam during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. I'm going to cover my ears up. The practical approach to have people not hear about Islam now is to have other people come and destroy what Islam really is and make you believe this is what it is. You can't cover your ears up because social media and global communication is there. The best thing we could do is shroud Islam with so much negativity and falsehood that people think that's what it is and they would never want to embrace it.
Yeah, I think the other point, Aqil, I wanted to bring up is that, within the United States diaspora, in academic journals, you look at the Journal of Sociology, for example, and many other writings and articles, several scholars, in fact, consider Islamophobia to be a form of xenophobia or racism. Some describe it as a kind of anti-Asian, anti-Turkic, anti-Arab racism. But that hasn't been the experience with a lot of people in the United States, because a large number of Muslims, in fact, come from the indigenous community, from the Americans, from Afro-Americans, from white Americans. So even the definition of, the idea of conflating Islamophobia with some degree of xenophobia or racism is not entirely correct. If you look at the development or the parallel developments between the two forms of racial bigotry, because in this particular instance, whilst people see this as some sort of overlapping phenomena and somehow the other define it as an anti-Muslim feeling and violence based on race, the reality of the situation is, for example, there are a lot of Caucasians, a lot of Afro-Americans that are accepting Islam in large numbers in the United States, and they are now the subject of Islamophobia or Islamophobic discourse. Would I be correct in that assessment?
Yeah, but I think it's a twofold. I think what happens, and I mentioned earlier, that you have two aspects to Islamophobia. You have the first aspect, which have two elements as well, the funding side and the faith side. So the funding side, the people behind the scenes that's funding Islamophobia, and they're using puppets and they're using characters like people online that we discussed earlier. Again, you know, the David Woods and the Sam Shimones. These are people that I encounter. So these are names that I know. But these people, the Sam Shimones and the David Woods, they're bums. I mean, literally, these people don't have any jobs. And they take whatever paycheck they can get from these people to do whatever it is, monetize themselves, embarrass themselves. This guy, David Wood, dressed up as a woman on national to make a video to lie against Islam. But who cares? I'm getting money for it. They have no character. They have no morals. This is one face of it. The other face is the ones behind the scenes that's funding them, that's allowed to give them finance and do things that they can, you know, give Islam a negative picture with. So this is one aspect of the Islamophobia, which has two categories. The second aspect is the ignorant side, ignorant people. And from them, I think it is a type of a xenophobia or whatever it is conflated in them because they're ignorant completely. They take it as almost Islam is a Arab religion. And so they begin to hate everything about it. You know, you ragheads, they become very racist in their slurs against Muslims. So from that aspect, from the ignorant masses who take this information, this negative information, these lies from these clowns, they take it and imbue it, and it instills in them a type of racism and hatred that they put across the board. So from that aspect, yes, I think that you find that. But from the people who know better, who don't care about the truth, they got nothing to do with racism for them. This is pure political and economical warfare against an institution and a way of life that they know, if it takes a stronghold society, can do great wonders as it done in the past. But that means it will upset and overthrow a lot of our social norms that's antithetical, you know, to Islamic values. Drinking, promiscuity, homosexuality, gambling, interest, all of these things they thrive on it.
A lot of us, Aqil, a lot of us on the outside, when we look at it and when we look at American society and American Muslim society, for a lot of us, the first thing that comes to mind is a nation of Islam. And of course, Louis Farrakhan, probably because of the fact that, they're so bold in proclamations and political statements and rallies and all of that. How do you explain, or how do you make a distinction between for the outside at least, or for a South African audience, in terms of mainstream Muslim society and groups like the Nation of Islam? Although there's talk that, for example, the Nation of Islam is also entering the mainstream and not as, if I could call it, cult-like as it was in the past to a certain extent. And now a lot of people are using the nation as a kind of a stepping stone to enter mainstream Islam and mainstream Muslim society. Is that demarcation happening? Is that distinction there? Or are they still in an insular enclave whereby they view themselves as separate to the broad fabric of Muslim society?
So you mentioned, so when you examine the American diaspora of Islam here, in the 60s, there was another reality that existed. And that reality was there was an overt effort to oppose the African American in America. Coming out of slavery, we know the rights, and it took time for blacks to get rights to vote. We know the videos and when we've seen from history, the marches, to get justice, and the killing of African Americans or blacks, overtly, with no fear of repercussion. Hanging them, Ku Klux Klan was a viable measure to get rid of the African American, and with little to any consequences. So this was something that affected the Black people, and Christianity just could not. It could not make the cut. It couldn't do anything really to combat this in any practical way. First and foremost, because Christianity doesn't have a practical method or strategy by which you can kind of go into and change social injustice. We have the idea of love and peace, and that's all good. But we don't find anything practical, no practical measures. Jesus didn't have a practical life to give to the Christians an example of how to do these things other than something philosophical. And in the 60s, amongst the African-American communities, this just wasn't cutting it. Martin Luther King and the marching was nice, but it wasn't getting anything done. So you had other movements that said, listen, we got to be as aggressive and as physical as these folks are being with us. They're killing us. And if we don't defend ourselves physically, singing a song and marching ain't going to do anything. So you had different groups that had a role. For instance, the Black Panthers was one of the groups that, vowed to defend Black people and black rights, even with militia. And they used the Constitution, right to bear arms. This is an American citizens' rights, Second Amendment. So they looked at these things and said, this is our rights, and we're going to defend ourselves from these attacks that's aimed directly at African-American Black people. But also you had another charismatic individual who came and seen the benefit of Islam, and he contrasted it to two elements. He contrasted to first the Christian element, which is the idea that God is white, because this was advocated. Jesus is the Son of God, and all you see is white pictures of Jesus. So they came and they took this and said, no. First, we're non-violent, but we don't accept this idea of God being white. The white man is a devil. And you look at the history of everything, they just showed how, this Caucasian individual has caused so much corruption wherever he went. So they use this also to fuel, the energy, the hatred actually, and the Black people against the white people. And it was there, it was right there, because your babies are being killed, your father's being killed, your father's being murdered, your mother's being raped, and there's no justice for it. So when a man comes and says, no, you're not Christians, in fact, you're Muslims, and God is not white, God is actually Black, and you Black people are gods, and the white man is the devil, they fuel that negative energy that Black people feel at that time and use it. And they begin to use not Christian terminology, because we couldn't use Christian terminology because the ones that was killing us and persecuting us also was using the same terminology. We need to use something different. So they took Islam as a combative method to go against Christianity and the white man, and they came up with the Nation of Islam. And they used that, to instill a type of hope and I guess a belief in the Black people at that time.
More of a reactionary movement. I mean, people don't seem to understand. It's not a cult. It emerged in a socio-political context of the 1960s. Exactly. The civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and so on. But I just want to know the present status of the Nation of Islam. I mean, do they view themselves anachronistically, whereby they still go back to that time, or alternatively, have they kind of evolved to be something more broader, to be a kind of a stepping stone with a broader fragment of Muslim society? Well, what's your take? What has happened there in that particular line, particularly with Minister Farrakhan?
Yeah, well, their leader is still Louis Farrakhan, and his allegiance still is to Elijah Muhammad and Jafar Muhammad, and the beliefs that the Nation of Islam has promoted since its inception. Now, he can say he made some headway towards more Sunni Islam, and in his history, he did. But when he realized that he would lose his authority and lose his leadership status, he kind of reverted back to carrying the old teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam teachings, and their teachings is antithetical to Islam. First and foremost, we don't believe any person is God incarnate in any kind of way. So this is completely out the picture. We don't believe that there's any prophet or messenger after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, this is another belief that's completely put you out of Islam. So they still hold firm to these ideas and beliefs. And although they still use Islamic terminology and may call themselves Muslims, but if they hold these beliefs and they understand them, then they automatically have dispelled themselves from Islam, because you can't believe that God came in any kind of form of any man, any kind of being. And you can't believe that there's a prophet after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are two essential beliefs that if you don't uphold them according to the Islam tradition, true Islam tradition, then you can't call yourself Muslim, or you can't really be a Muslim, no matter what you say about yourself. So I don't think that there's much headway from the Nation of Islam at this point, other than maybe some lip service that you may hear in different points. But Farrakhan still holds to the tenets of the Nation of Islam. He still promotes the final call, which lists their beliefs on the back. And almost half of those beliefs are completely opposition to Islam, true Islam. So that movement, I think my personal opinion is that I think that when Farrakhan dies, I think the movement will die as well. I think he's like the last stronghold of that movement. And I think when he passes on to his judgment to face whatever he put in front of him, that movement, it won't have a leader that can hold it together, and the people kind of will fall by the wayside. And then I think at that point, they will begin to look at other possibilities, maybe more mainstream Islam, because maybe their hearts are attached to Islam. They like the discipline, something that came out of Nation Islam, which it did. It often helped the people. It gave them a type of discipline. There was a practical benefit in what they promoted in many cases, but belief-wise, we can't call it Islam. And I think that if Farrakhan passes on and he would get whatever's coming to him, then I think that movement won't last any longer to be recognized many years after him.
One point, since I've raised, and that's quite interesting in terms of that, because when you tie that up and then you look at other forms and organizations in the United States, the one thing which always fascinates me is that you've got these massive endowments, and I read about these endowments made, for example, by the Saudi regime, the Saudi government, for example, Georgetown University, towards some of the major universities in the United States, Harvard, for example, and a lot of this Islamic studies departments. I know Georgetown University with the famous John Esposito, who we've dealt with in the past, is heavily funded. And a lot of these mainstream universities are heavily funded by Muslim businessmen and indeed by many governments within the Middle East. How come, despite the funding that is there, the academic departments and certainly the fraternities that have been formed, particularly within the Department of Islamic Studies and so on, haven't in any way provided an effective means of challenging the status quo at a political level in terms of, for example, countering the Zionist influence, or create a body or a politic or a think tank which is equivalent for that particular matter to the Zionist lobby, which, every single American president has to go and speak before AIPAC before the election year, during the electioneering period. How come, despite the fact that you've got this support that is coming somewhat, but it hasn't kind of played out its role on the political level, despite the fact that funds seem to be getting, and you've got these organizations like ISNA and ICNA, which is the other one, ICNA, and then of course CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations. Where does the failings lie? Explain where the disconnect is, because I see, and I've heard the speech by Bridget Gabriel some time back, and even people on the far right, that they complaining that, look, most of our universities are funded by Muslim countries and Muslim governments, and they give Saudi Arabia an example, and then they cite Georgetown University, and they cite Harvard University, and so on and so forth. And they use this as a means to say how Muslims are coming and taking over the educational system. But the reality of the situation is that in actual fact, it's not happening. The contrary wise is that Muslims still are on the back foot ideologically, politically, and indeed economically, in terms of establishing a proper foothold in the United States and American society. Your comments on that, Aqil?
Well, I think that when you look at these institutions that's being funded by different Muslim governments, I think it's enough to create an alternative in the academic society, in academic sector, in schooling, colleges like this, but they're not political. These professors can't take political license and to go, and to promote Islam politically, even though they can explain it politically. They're not going to, go and confront other institutions that's politically against Islam. But at least in these environments, in these colleges, in these universities, there is a voice of Islam. that people should hear enough so that Islam is not completely out the picture, but you hear about Islam in a better way than what, if they're not there, you will hear the complete opposite against Islam. You hear people come and say terrible things about Islam. So people like, and I mean, I've been watching his videos and his material, his books for a long time, John Esposito. People like him, you know, who's not a Muslim, but he appreciates, you know, he's academic and he appreciates two things. One, the paycheck. And two, the fact that, you know, saying Islam is a viable alternative to what we have in other aspects of society. But is John Esposito going to go and promote, you know, saying Islamic justice for people that's Muslims, Islamophobia that's been attacked or whatever it is? That's not his job. That's not his jurisdiction. He's not being paid to be a lawyer or to be an apologist, or he's paid to be a professor and give you the academic outlook and a true academic assessment of Islam. So I think that they're not in a position to take on such roles. Now, I find it strange that in these universities, they can't find a genuine practicing educator Muslim to put in these universities as a professor of Islamic studies like this to teach, and people can not only hear Islam, but actually see Islam from the individual. That when it's time to pray, the professor also is going to go pray. And the professor is going to give you Islamic values, and you're going to see Islam from the individual, not just a professor who's giving you an academic seminar, you know what I'm saying, about what Islam is. Because at that point, it's information. It's information. And as Muslims, we know there's a distinction between information and knowledge. There's a difference between information and knowledge. So, like, for instance, Allah in the Quran, he mentions that indeed, from those who fear me are the ulama. From amongst the people who have khashya of Allah are the ulama. And the ulama, not in the technical sense, but those who have knowledge of Allah. So indeed, a person who's an alim, who's a Muslim, and live in Islam and teaching Islam is different from a professor who's not Muslim, but give you an academic assessment of what Islam is. So I think that if you start putting righteous Muslim, educated Muslims in these universities to teach Islam, opposed to just Western non-Muslim professors, you may get a different effect.
I think the other point is also, it's not just simply putting in non-Muslim Western professors, but you have now this tendency of a lot of so-called secularized Muslims, individuals that are involved in Quranic studies, for example, or, you know, there's this recent, and you've probably been following the controversy on the issue surrounding now, which shouldn't be a controversy in actual fact, because it's been known to all of us for such a long time. But within contemporary discourse, which is popularized by the missionaries, the idea of the qira'at, or, for example, you know, since the discoveries of the Sinai palimpsest, you've got a number of academics and indeed nominal Muslims and indeed non-Muslims that are basically involving themselves in these kind of studies at academic universities, at Western universities. Muslims are not primarily involved in this field of study. I mean, for some reason or the other, at least at an academic level in mainstream universities, either by default or by deliberate exclusion, they are never involved in the study of this. If you look at some of the names, and I've got the names, I've got a whole collection of the individuals that are involved in this particular field of study. I mean, they are either nominal Muslims or secular, or alternatively non-Muslims entirely. Do you see that there is a deliberate exclusionary element to this whole process? Or alternatively, it just so happens that these academics happen to be incidentally non-Muslims or secular by their very nature?
Well, two things. One, it's interesting you bring this up, because I've been traveling heavily for work in the States, because many people who know me know that I don't live in America, but my work is in America as a contractor. But when I'm in America, I can get to my studio, I can make videos on our channel to do the material. So when I can't do this material, then the channel goes kind of still for some time. But this issue in the last year and a half came up again, this idea of qira'at and stuff like this. And I find it strange that like how is this still like gaining any kind of momentum and making Muslims have any doubt about this? First and foremost, the Muslims, we have a science called tajweed, which is, it's one of the first things you learn when you learn the Quran. You have to learn how to recite the Quran correctly. So tajweed, I believe strongly that tajweed is one of the miracles of the Quran and of Islam. Just the science of tajweed, that we know how a letter exactly is pronounced and how long you hold that letter to what note or to how long, the same way during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you don't find this in the Sunnah. You can't find, for instance, when we recite Al-Fatiha, at the end of Al-Fatiha, every single body, you hear an imam, person who's qari, person who's hafiz, even a layman, when they first learn it, they know wala dhalin. Why you hold it like that? Why you don't just say wala dhalin? Because they know this is like medal lazim. You have to hold it 6 harakat. It's a mandatory. So you notice when you learn tajweed, right? So the Quran has been protected. There's no doubt about that. And we have it from, initially the Quran was protected and preserved and passed on from person to person. If a person took a mushaf and he memorized a mushaf by himself from a mushaf, he's not considered a hafiz. He can't call himself a hafiz because he haven't sat with a teacher to make sure everything is correct and recite it back to him from memory. He memorized it, but he won't have the title and the privilege of being called a hafiz until he sits with a teacher who memorized it, who has an unbroken chain of isnad all the way back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you study the history of the Quran, it's amazing. And when you sit with people who know it and they give you the isnad, I sat with scholars and they give you the chain of narration from themselves all the way back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I did a hadith class with a sheikh in Egypt, and he recited a hadith, and he said, if you take it from me, now you're in the chain. He gave it to us. So if I memorize his chain, and I take it from him, I can narrate the hadith from him all the way to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with isnad, unbroken. So what the Quran is like this. But I think what happened is that there's an academic approach to, like for instance, manuscripts like this, and we're trying to kind of be on par, show that our manuscript preservation is better than yours, or like this, and that's not traditionally how the Quran was preserved. The manuscripts are there as like a just in case. During the time of Abu Bakr, Umar, he went to Abu Bakr and he said that, write the Quran down. And he said, Abu Bakr was surprised. He said, why? You want me to do something that the Prophet didn't do, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So we memorize the Quran by heart. We don't write it down. He said, but what's happened is that the Muslims in war, a lot of the Huffaz are being killed. And I fear that if we don't write it down as a backup preservation, then we may, in fact, lose the Quran, which is traditionally memorized in the hearts of men and passed down from person to person. So even during that time, we see the written aspect of the Quran is always a backup. And through history, manuscripts, paper, don't always last. We have some intact, full. We have some that's not completely intact. But for us, that's never a discussion because we have people who can come. I know a scholar, I sat with him, I did Quran with him. He wrote the Quran from memory 5 times by heart. He could just write the whole Quran out. Bring me a scribe, write. And he can recite the Quran word for word, letter for letter, everything by heart. Now, you get into, what about these different qira'ats? All of the different qira'ats is the same. It all goes back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And another setting, I'm in Mauritania, and I go for a daughters every day. And when we go for lessons, the scholar, he teach you in his house. We go to the masjid, we pray. He would go to his house. He would relax. The students would come and it would be a line, 10, 15 students in line, waiting to sit with the sheikh and do their lesson. In the beginning, I used to think that if I go first, I'm good. I get my lesson in and I go do my studies. But one time I got there a little late, and I had maybe 5, 6 people before me, and I realized if I come late, I get more lessons. Some people are there for poetry, some people are there for fiqh, some people are there for aqidah, some people are there for qira'at. And the sheikh, he memorized every single thing. Sheikh Yusuf, I'm not lying. He would finish the line before the student finished the line, and the student's reading from a book. And the sheikh has no book. He has no book, but he memorized all of the mutun. The mutun in fiqh, the mutun in aqidah, the mutun in usul, the mutun in Quran, qira'at. He memorized everything. He's a walking encyclopedia. I see it with my eyes. And before the student finishes line, he would finish the line and then give commentary. There's books from the earliest time about the qira'at, the different recitations, all this. Why is it so strange now? But it's because Muslims are ignorant of this, and people take this and say, "Oh, look at all these versions, all of this." No, this is projected.
You know why? You know why, Sheikh Aqil? I think in the 80s. In the Didat era, the Didat period, Didat had this traditional approach of you've got so many Bibles. The traditional Didat approach is you've got this version versus this version versus this version. And for years, it appears to me that the Christian missionary tautology had no accurate response to that. And so what happened, these ignoramuses amongst them, they now came up because of the fact that these qira'ats, are now readily available, and they translated. I believe Sheikh Dr. Fadel Suleiman has translated all the 10 qira'ats because they're so easily available. For many of these missionaries, and indeed a lot of Muslims living in South Africa and different parts of the world, this is a new field entirely. They're not aware, for example, of the difference between the Warsh and the Hafs. So now a Christian missionary would argue, well, look, you're saying we've got different Bibles. Look at you. You've got a different Quran. Here's a Warsh. Here's a Hafs. Maliki Yawmiddin, Maliki Yawmiddin, or Awsa wa Wassa. Can you see? So it seems to me that this was a convenient polemic that missionaries adopted as a means of attempting to combat the traditional attacks on the Bible, where, we would have the traditional approach that, look, there are different versions of the Bible. So a Christian would now say, well, there's no different versions of the Bible. You've got different versions of the Quran. And so that's how the whole issue of Qira'at, but it seems to me that it has only attained currency in the past 4 or 5 years. And I think Muslims ourselves, even amongst some Muslim apologists, they make a big meal out of this. I don't know if you saw the interview with Sheikh Yasser Qadi last year, which just then went viral and created a mass mountain out of a molehill. And Muslims are now shocked. What's going on here? Do we have now different versions of the Quran? And I think it's ignorance amongst Muslims who are not aware, who should have been aware. And of course, the fact that amongst Christians, this is obviously the missionary tautology would use this as a means to attack Islam. But I think it's mainly Western Muslims for whom Arabic is not a primary tongue. I mean, if you go to Mauritania, you go to Morocco, Tunisia. I mean, this is foolish. It's ludicrous to see that.
It's part of their studies. I mean, they study it and their madrasa. It's part of. They grow up knowing it. They grow up memorizing it. I got a teacher, my Quran teacher in Egypt. He knows the 7 qira'at. And I actually intended to do a video with him. He's not only my teacher, but he's my friend. But it's just my travels, because this happened last year. And in the last year, I mean, with COVID and everything, I was heavy in America. I spent a lot of time away from the family and, here working. But it was my intention. And it just time passed, and I guess the momentum that I felt initially kind of died down. But for instance, we find this directly in the hadith. It's not for instance, there's a hadith of Umar ibn Khattab. He heard a man praying, and he heard him reciting Surah Al-Furqan. And he said, when I heard him recite it, this is narrated by Umar. He said, when I heard him recite it, I wanted to grab him in his prayer because he was reciting it in a way different from how the Prophet ﷺ taught me. He said, but I waited, for the safety of the prayer. He's praying, so I'm going to just wait. He said, but when he finished praying, he grabbed the man and he dragged him to the Prophet ﷺ. 2 things. First and foremost is the zeal and the protectiveness of the Muslims to make sure that the Quran was only recited in a way that the Prophet ﷺ taught. That's first and foremost. So Umar learned a way and he heard something different and he automatically thought this is wrong and you must be corrected automatically. And this is known, for instance, if you go to any prayer during Ramadan and the sheikh makes a mistake, the whole Jama'ah, they know the surah, they will correct it. Why? Because we want to make sure the Quran is always preserved. So Umar said, but I waited. And when he finished, he dragged him and he said, this man recited Surah Al-Furqan in a way different from how you taught me. Umar talking to the Prophet, he's saying, you taught me this directly, and he recited a way different. And the Prophet said to the man, he said, recite. And he told Umar to recite. And he said, both of you are correct because the Quran has been revealed in 7 different ahruf. Now, there's a khilaf amongst ulama what ahruf is and like this, but the point being, we know that there were different pronunciations and ways that the Quran was given from the Prophet Muhammad himself. Not different ways it came later and how the Quran said it now. All of this goes back with isnad, back to Prophet Muhammad. So there's no discrepancy amongst the Muslims. We can trace every single variant narration, qira'ah, back to Prophet Muhammad with isnad, 100%. And I don't know how this issue is keep coming up and catching any ground with anybody as if somehow the Quran has different variants, or this is like some new phenomenon. It undermines the authenticity of the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad himself taught the Quran in different ways to some Sahaba for different reasons. Whether because, for instance, you have what's called imala. Like we say, we say mu'minun, or we say mu'minin, or mu'minun. One is without hamza, so you don't have the sukoon, so you say mu'minun. And this is a met, it stretches. The other one, you have sukoon on the hamza, so you say mu'minun. Both of them are in the modes of recital. So you say mu'minun or mu'minun. To us, it may be subtle, and especially to people who have no Arabic understanding or any Arabic background, for them it's even more complicated. And I think many ulama don't spend a lot of time trying to explain this to non-Arabs because, like, you have to know Arabic or learn something about it even to appreciate understanding. You take a mode of recitation, you learn that one, and right now, that's what you have. But if you don't understand Arabic language, understand the different dialects that occurred during the time of Prophet Muhammad and how to pronounce certain things, even if I give you the different qira'ats, it wouldn't serve you any benefit because you can't recognize the distinction anyway. So I think many scholars in this time, especially with English-speaking people, have shied away from making this an academic field because maybe it'll bore people or confuse them or just spend a lot of time about something that they probably can't grasp. But this anyway, the Quran as being a linguistic miracle. For anybody who studies Arabic and you read the Quran, you see how miraculous its lugha is. But if you don't have no idea of Arabic, you would never appreciate the linguistic miracle of the Quran because you can't compare to anything. You have no frame of reference. So there's a reality that not knowing Arabic kind of
it's a stultifying factor, it's a stultifying factor because it is. I mean, it's our fault. Basically, I think the problem is that you've got the Islamic educational overhaul. I mean, there needs to be, most of us certainly, and I don't know about the United States, but in the South African context, we were taught to just simply be good reciters, very good reciters of the Arabic language without understanding a word. So you've got Hufaz that can recite the Quran better than many Arabs in South Africa, but they don't understand a single word. I mean, it's amazing situation. I want to move on to another segment on that, because it seems to me that coupled with that, and I know we're running short on time, so I'm just monitoring the time, is that, in the 70s and the 60s, you had revisionists. What I mean by revisionists that were fringe, there was someone called Professor John Wansborough. He wrote a book called, I think, Sectarian Milieu, and then, of course, Quranic Studies, One of his students were famously Michael Cook and Patricia Crone. They wrote the book you probably heard of called Hagarism, The Making of the Islamic World and Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. And essentially the thesis behind these books was that, Islam developed much, much later. The Quran evolved much later. And then, of course, you had they look at ideas and documents like the Doctrina Iacobi, and so all this kind of nonsensical idea that it kind of emerged within a socio-political era, but it was influenced by various other factors and elements. Now, that was by and large relegated to the academic circle, and it was a very fringe academic studies, albeit it was still within the academic sphere. However, I mean, in the late 2000s, and then, you've got people like Joseph Smith, otherwise known as Jay, who has popularized a discourse to such an extent that now if I walk down the road to Johannesburg or Durban, I'm going to come across a person, a Christian who knows nothing about Islam, but is rattling out this kind of idea about, from the works of Dan Gibson. He's written a book called Early Islamic Qiblas, where he gives the idea that the direction was also facing towards Petra and so on. This has now attained currency, such popular currency that the original academics that came up with this, like Michael Cook and Patricia Crone, they long discarded their theories. But this has now entered into at a populist level, and it's now basically been given out as tracts to youngsters, to children, to Christians in churches. I mean, ordinary churches. You've got what do you call this? The charismatic churches. Charismatic churches. They've got no scholarly discourse in terms of their background, and you'd see tracts and publications of this particular level that has reached such a populist level. And I think it comes from your country, and indeed from the United Kingdom. Everything seems to come from your country. Explain the phenomenon behind this, because it seems to me that there is an attempt somehow or the other to say that, look, the best way to attack Islam is to now show not that Islam is violent or it oppresses women, it's to show that the Prophet Muhammad never existed, that Islam never existed. And so the best way to break down the identity, it seems to be a new missionary polemic, the best way to break down the identity of a Muslim and to show that Islam is invalid is to show it doesn't exist. This was never the case before in the past, but it's been since the late 2000s, mid 2000s to 2021. And that seems to me now the current circle, to the extent that this is now, I mean, online, you see this kind of garbage that's been floating around. You've probably come across this all the time.
Well, I see it from Jay Smith a lot. And I watch some of the videos, because this is actually where I learned from it. And this guy, Gibson, I looked at some of his work from Jay Smith. But it's very laughable. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I think for Muslims, and as myself that do like online work, if you want to call me an apologist or whatever title, it's important for us to have an awareness of this, so to address it. But I mean, to somebody like yourself and myself, it's quite laughable, because what you're doing is that you're saying basically you have to kind of just rewrite completely all of history. Not only during the time of Prophet Muhammad, but also those who immediately followed him, and those who followed him, and those who followed him, who had direct access to his information and narrated. So, for instance, you take somebody like Imam Malik, rahimahullah, right? Imam Malik is in the city of Medina. He's called Imam of Dar al-Hijrah. He's the Imam of the place of Hijrah, which is Medina. And he is having a fiqh class with someone, and they come to him to argue about a measurement, which is a saw, which was like a type of measurement, right? And the man is saying, no, it's this amount, it should be like this. And Imam Malik, he said to his servant, the one that to give him his things, he said, bring me my cup, bring me my measuring bowl. He said, this is the same measuring bowl of the Prophet ﷺ that he used. This is his bowl that he used. I'm in his city. I'm getting the relics of his life from his followers. This is the same one that he used that you read about. How are you going to argue with me about anything? So if you get rid of people like, if you say the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ didn't exist, then that means that these relics, these narrations, all these things that people attribute to who? To Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, all the history has to be thrown out. And it's so laughable, but I mean, what do you do when you have nothing else to grasp? Like, they say anything, and you say it long enough, and you begin to believe it. I mean, Allah in the Quran mentions about the Qibla. I mean, so they don't say exactly where. I mean, but we know, for instance, that there was first a direction, and Allah mentioned it. I mean, all of it is there, and again, where does all of this come from? All of the hadith compilers, Imam Bukhari, from all over the world, where they get their literature from? Where is this embodiment information coming from? Quran reciters and Mufassirin, where are they attributing all this information from in this time frame with Isnad? Again, with Isnad, as we mentioned before, I got this from my uncle, who got this from his teacher, who got this from him. I mean, so I'm going back 3 generations. It stops right here, and they attribute it to this person. So to the idea of saying, okay, the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't exist. This is also a claim of Robert Spencer. This is one of his motives as well. I mean, he presents an argument, that the Prophet Muhammad never existed. Well, something? If you want to make this claim that the most influential man in history never existed, keep that. I'll take, the word never existed. I mean, he's the most influential person ever in history. Absolutely. And you're telling me he never existed. I mean, that's amazing, I
mean, it's a sense of desperation from what I can see, Aqil. It's like they're on the last hurrah of desperation from what I can see. I want to wrap up shortly, but I want to point out is that Riza Aslan states that he says that the Islamophobia industry, he draws the parallels between the Cold War era of McCarthyism, and he says that as McCarthyism ended, and as the kind of hatred towards the Cold War and the Cold threat came to an end, you're going to see a situation of a spike, a crescendo, and then an eventual decline. Do you get that sense? I mean, I don't know. But with COVID seems to have kind of messed up everything. Now people are talking about one world government, Orwellian state, and the focal attention seems to have been shifted over the past few years on the medical establishment, what's going on. Do you see a kind of a shift in perception? The more and more people are reading, the more and more that people are accepting Islam in the United States, the more and more that Muslims are becoming more vocal in terms of articulating. And we are now getting, I mean, people like yourself, many others are becoming far more articulate. I know I used to see in the past, even on Fox News, we used to see clips of Fox News. Adina Lekovic, I think she was part of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee at some years back. And it seems to me that there is a shift. Do you see a shift in the horizon in terms of change of perception, change in terms of more fairness and more accuracy in reporting, even on networks like Fox for that particular matter, which is traditionally the most biased of the whole lot of them?
What I see is again, global communication, mass media, social media, all of this, and then different elements as happening, the government is losing control of the story, of the narrative. Before, when you didn't have all these outlets, the government kind of controlled the narrative. So they would create the enemy and they would narrate, how popular opinion should be towards the enemy that they created. Now, with so many different segments of society, and many becoming dissatisfied with government, especially with the idea of a black president coming into office, and now whatever it is, I think that there's a frustration and a distrust towards the government that they don't no longer believe the narrative of the government anymore, and people now are creating or come up with their own conspiracy theories, their own narrative. So, although Islam is still the prevalent enemy to be careful of, as it can really transform society if it ever gains hold, people are now putting their own conspiracy theories out there, and with social media, many people are adapting to it. QAnon and all these other kind of crazy conspiratorial, the cults that's coming up. This is not government based. And I think what's happening is causing a distraction that you're seeing so much stuff out there that the government itself is kind of losing control of the narrative. that they kind of now it's like a whole bunch of mini fires they got to put out. And we still want to make sure Islam doesn't get the recognition that the Muslims intend, because it would cause us some problems. But now we got all these other anti-government conspiratorial groups that's attacking us as well, and they're getting a lot of traction online. 1 million views and things are going viral. So with this social media, it's a double-edged sword. And I think
it's a double-edged sword which government. And I think this is also the other problem, because sometimes people make the claim that the Trump administration was the worst administration for the Muslim community of the United States. But that's actually not true. I mean, under the Obama administration, you had discrimination and large, you had drone killings, you had, in fact, more drone attacks against Muslims. I believe Olaki's son, more attacks and bombings of Muslim countries during the Obama administration, the liberal Democratic administration, than the Republican. So it's really not a question of one side or the other. I mean, they both are just simply separate sides of the same coin. Government has traditionally been separate sides of the same coin. And under the Biden administration, you see a continuation of that particular approach, support towards Israeli hegemony and so on, as opposed to what it was in the previous era and period.
I think with Trump, the rhetoric was very loud. So, it was more the rhetoric from this guy, because he really wasn't like, he wasn't tactful, he didn't really have much tact in going to do anything. He was very ignorant of the position. So he's a very he's very charismatic. He can, he's a celebrity, but that wasn't really the position for him. But to some people, they liked him because he spoke their mind. He spoke their mind. But in terms of what he done against the Muslim community, no, other than like the idea of trying to make this ban and this loud stuff that he attempted to do because people was pushing this thing and thought they can do with him in office. No, I don't think he was the worst president, to the status of the Muslims. But I think what happened right before him was Trump was like to white America, it was like, we got our house back from a black man, that took our house over, and they never thought this would be the case. I mean, it was personal to them. Many people, like a black man in the White House, so to them it was personal. And Trump was like taking it back, and you would never have this again. So I think that opened up to many people like a wound that they kind of let die down. They were racist, but it just time moved on. But I think that was like a slap in the face to have this black man in the White Office and the White House, the office of presidency. And it kind of incited in them a return back to making sure that we won't be, we won't lose our position as, not the minority, but the majority, and the voice in this country, because this is America. This is a white man's land from many of their perspectives. This is their ideology. And Trump, he stroked this to many people. They liked this feeling that he gave them after having a black president. But unfortunately, the Muslims, we have a lot to do in a society like America, even on the political front. And
what fascinates me is that, and you're speaking about Trump and the right. One of the critiques that the right or the far right has against the left is that, whilst traditionally both the left and the right somehow the other saw Islam as this kind of monolithic block, this kind of static monolith, unresponsive to change, separate and other. It seems to me that now the criticism is that there is this. Do you see, or I don't know whether you perceive that there's the whole rise of the woke movement, or the kind of woke culture, or the appropriation of what woke is, because woke in the traditional sense and woke, the new woke as it is understood now, is something new. But you see this kind of alliance, for example, when I see Linda Sarsour and Muslim women and the Muslim community and Muslim organizations, and then in partnership with the LGBTQ community, in partnership with, for example, Black Lives Matter, whatever the case is. Do you see this as being a double-edged sword? Because more often than not, you find that the agenda that they are fighting for, the struggles that they're fighting for about social justice and creating egalitarianism and an equitable society seems to be well and good. But there is a double-edged sword in this partnership, because this is now one of the criticisms leveled against Muslims. And certainly the far right's warning towards, for example, the LGBTQ community, that look, these Muslims will be in marching with you when it comes to protesting for Palestine or protesting for social justice and equality for all and so on, but they will turn against you. Is this a double-edged sword? Because you see this alliance, there's a kind of a schizophrenic alliance that's there, what's now under this so-called rubric of new woke, whatever that means, but it's clearly an appropriation of what to be woke was. How do you see this? How do you understand this phenomenon that is now so prevalent in the United States and American society?
I do think it's a double-edged sword. I think many Muslims have to be careful if they approach this issue and they need to make disclaimers prior to anything they do with these other organizations, especially, for instance, the LGBT community. Because what happens is, first and foremost, as Muslims, we believe that there are human rights. There's human rights. Everybody should be treated humanly. There's human rights. And your religious preference, your sexual preference, your political preference, that's all, technically your personal preference, and you have a right to it. But when you come and demand that I have to honor these personal preferences you have on me that is against what I believe, that's something different. And for instance, for many years, you have, as they call it, keep it in the closet, saying against the gay community. That's your business. But now they're coming out and they're demanding rights. And they demand these rights as if they're human rights on the same level as somebody has been physically oppressed for their belief as a Muslim or for their race. So now do Muslims join in hand with people for human rights, even though that means when it's their turn to demand their segment of it, they march, like you mentioned, they march with you for Palestine, other things. But when it comes to being hand in hand with them for gay rights, does a Muslim stand up for gay rights? Is there such thing as gay rights to come outwardly and demand you accept my lifestyle and adopt it to be part of the normal way of life? How can Muslims, how can we do that? How can we say that, yeah, you got the right to advocate for your lifestyle to be as normal as my lifestyle when I go marry my wife? We can't do it. So it's not that we're against you as a human being, but you are advocating something that's against what God has legislated. We don't believe that this is a human right you have to come and demand a normalization of something that's immoral.
I was just mute there. If I may ask you then, in the scheme of things, and in view of the fact that Muslims already have a negative image in the mainstream media or have had this kind of prejudice and this fear, would it be counterproductive then for Muslim organizations to partner with, for example, groups like Antifa or Black Lives Matter, or what goes under the rubric of new woke, which is the in thing today, because there's just so many elements to this whole thing. I mean, if it's not even in the environmentalists that are joining the fray and so on. Is it problematic then to be associated? Because these are kind of issues that we can be concerned about, and certainly the rights of lives of all people and so on. Where it doesn't impinge on the moral aspect, would it be problematic in joining these groups or associating with these groups or allying with these groups, or the ones that I've mentioned?
Me personally, and I don't want to give no fatwa or make a ruling for something like this technical, but I think it's incumbent upon Muslims, especially Muslims in the mainstream media that's doing this activist work, to make disclaimers when they go and they saying they're going to support, saying human rights movement or something like this, or human rights march, because Antifa and other Black Lives Matter also, their platform is just not this one aspect. They have other things on their platform and their agenda in their bylaws in the organization that's against Islam. And I think that, it's important for Muslims. Listen, what's your bylaws? Like, you have one aspect about, Black Lives Matter, and we're against, the oppression of any life, Black lives, particularly because we see in a concerted effort to, to have disregard for Black lives in the cities. So this is a reality for sure, and we need to address this. But when we say, okay, we're going to partner up with you hand in hand, now when the people advocate and promote the bylaws and the agenda of Antifa or Black Lives Matter, and you start seeing things and you Muslims say, oh, I didn't know that. Well, you should know that, because you're going to align yourselves with these groups, and it's not just one platform or one problem they have. They have many things, that they advocate for their organization that you should be aware of. And Muslims need to become more politically active on our own agenda. And our own agenda can tackle all these other agendas. We don't need to necessarily part of all the people, because our deen already offers solutions to these problems. But when we are just kind of like, the tag along, we hoping that, we get some recognition for Muslims as well, then, we become subject at the mercy of these organizations that, on one side, okay, we can agree with them on this one, but on the other side, we're against them 100%. Like even for the Muslims, the right and the left, the political, dichotomy in America. There's some things that the Muslims, we share in common with the right. And there's some things that we share in common with the left, but we both sides, there's things that we are competing against on both sides. There's aspects.
Absolutely, and I agree with you, because I think sometimes we will probably engage ourselves in significant moral compromises or political compromises on at that level. Certainly, we just simply embrace the ideological underpinnings of all these particular movements. I want to close up. Yeah, I want to ask you, for those of us who are interested, in the United States before, we had a lot of individuals that were involved in the field of dawah, in the field of debate and discourse. What does the dawah lineup look like in the United States? Are there individuals that are developing, growing up, and getting involved in sharing the message? I know it's yourself, I believe Brother Shadid Lewis, a few others. Some have veered off to other ideologies. Hamza Abdul Malik, who was very close to the late Sheikh Ahmed Didat. He's become somebody that's Quran only. And it seems to me that they all got certain ideological pits that they kind of eventually get to tap into. But how do things look on your side? Is it promising by virtue of the fact that you've got these Islamophobes that are there online on YouTube, some of these bums that you mentioned? What's the counter response? Do we have Muslims that are becoming more and more active on social media, on YouTube, on the YouTube channels, countering the kind of garbage that we see there happening?
Well, I think it's twofold. You have a dawah that's general, that is just trying to promote what Islam is and getting the message of Islam out to people, without the idea of confronting the Islamophobic side of it. So that aspect of dawah, I think, it's kind of like what you see funded by Saudi Arabia or stuff like this. They want to just get massive literature out to the people. It's what Islam is, why Islam, stuff like this. But they don't focus on dealing with particularly Islamophobia or online opportunists who are looking, to monetize themselves, to make money by mocking Islam or going against Islam. So in that aspect, online, I still think there's a void, and this is one of the reasons why I developed my channel. The problem for me is that this is not how I make money. Everything I do online is free. I buy my own equipment, I buy everything. So it's my own time, my own resources, and my own finances. But at the same time, I have a profession. I'm a contractor, I have my own business. So when my work schedule is heavy, then I'm away from doing what my passion is, which is talking about Islam and, refuting the doubts. But the funding and the ability to do this to keep up, this is where I think many Muslims, maybe we lose the momentum, because other people, like for instance, David Wood, people like, they like this type of mockery, comedic approach towards stuff. It's very, very, very laughable, and it generates views, and that would generate money. Muslims, we're not into coming, from a comedic point of perspective. We want to bring you the truth. And sometimes it may be pretty boring, it may be pretty dry, but our goal is to bring you the truth about what Islam is, and hopefully there's an awakening in you, and the Lord guides your hearts to that. But that's not what sells. So when it doesn't sell and it doesn't generate any money for those who are doing it, then if you don't have financial backing, it becomes something that you invest in yourself. Maybe it takes a toll. It's kind of maybe overburdensome for you, or you lose the time to do it because you have to go take care of your family like this. So I think these realities put some Muslims kind of behind, in many regards. The whole interest thing as well. Many people, can go and take loans from the bank for this and for that reason with no regards, and fund different things, whatever it is. But for the Muslims, we try our best to stay away from this rebirth perspective because of its ammunition in Islam. But, many people, they get ahead of us because of that. So we're fighting some battles that Muslims need to come together and say, how do we address these issues to give the Muslims the same level playing field as others? If not, we're going to always be behind. And even though their content is full of lies and distortion and untruth, they have the upper hand because they have financial backing and people who are willing to go do it that we don't have. So I think the Dawah front, it needs more. And I wish I can give more time. I'm thinking maybe that if I'm not even in my office and in my studio to produce videos, maybe I do more interviews just to keep the channel current and deal with some of the issues. And you're welcome, to bring topics up if you want. And as always, if you let me know you want me to be with you, I'm with you. It's alhamdulillah. So I think this opportunity to come and address it is needed, it's beneficial. But I still think the da'wah, in terms of attacking it or addressing Islamophobia and the online critics against Islam and the charlatans and the opportunists and the comedians who have no regard for the truth. They have no regard for even for their own belief. When you look at people like David Wood and Sam Shimon and Ervin Cannon and what's the guy name? Ali Shabat or whatever. These people, all these, some people, ex-Muslims, for them, it's all about how do I get a deal? How do I get money out of this? How do I profit from it? And they're signing. People give them, we don't have people offering us finances to bring the truth.
That's the unfortunate thing. It's a money-making industry, and they invest quite heavily. I want you to end up, Aqil, my dear brother, final parting words to the Muslims of South Africa, and certainly those Christians out there who are celebrating Christmas and that may be joining this particular program, be viewing it. Today does in fact happen to be Christmas Day for a large number of Christians. I want you to give us your final parting comments to both the Muslims and the Christians who may be joining us in South Africa. Over to you.
First and foremost, my salams to all the Muslims in South Africa and abroad. And alhamdulillah, you have in your presence a great Sheikh and Brother Yusuf Ismail, the very dear brother of mine, alhamdulillah. His work is there for you to see. And spend more time with him, his literature and his organizations and what he's doing. Support him, help him, give him the necessary assistance he needs to continue to produce programs like this. And to reach out to not only the Muslims to educate them, but also to non-Muslims, because Brother Yusuf, Sheikh Yusuf, has been in many debates and has dealt with topics to bring the truth of Islam to foreign concepts in Christianity that Muslims don't believe in. So into South Africa in particular, I never visited there yet. But maybe one day my brother, inshallah, will invite me and we come and spend some time there with him as well.
Definitely.
Stay connected with a brother like this. Alhamdulillah, you have a gem in your place there. And Allah bless you and continue to bless you with brothers like Yusuf Ismail, inshallah. To the Christians in South Africa and at large, In the Quran, Allah says to the Christians, say to them a common word. Let's come to a common word between us, that we worship Allah alone and don't ascribe any partners to Him. The Islamic message, the message of Tawheed, monotheism, it's very simple, but it's very profound and very far-reaching. And I'll give you an example of some of the things that when we study Aqidah, we learn some of these precepts. We have some things that is called like the impossibilities for Allah. Are there things that's impossible for God? And if you go to an average Christian and say, is there anything impossible for God? You would say, no, nothing's impossible for God. And because you believe God's majesty is beyond things being impossible for God. Well, the Muslims will say, because of God's majesty, there are some things that are impossible for God because of His greatness. So God is so great. God is the all-knowing. It's impossible for God to be ignorant. It's impossible for God to be weak. God is an ever-living. It's impossible for God to be non-existent. So these are things that we learn to offset these ideas that people come with trick questions. Like, for instance, is there a rock too heavy for God to lift? This is like just some polemics that people want to throw at you to make you think and, like they dumbfound you. But for the Muslims, this doesn't bother us because it's impossible for God to be incompetent. God is all-hearing. He hears all our prayers when we call to Him. It's impossible for God to be deaf. Not because of impossibility, because of lack of ability, but because of majesty. God is too great to be less than His greatness. So when we look at God as being the ultimate creator of everything in existence, and He's all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-wise, and almighty, how do you reduce God to be a human being that was born from a woman on a particular day, at a particular time, in a particular place? How would you put this on God? We say, Subhanallah amma yasifun. Glory be to Allah above what they describe. You cannot put God in a womb of a woman and have Him come out through the birth process and then say our God was born. It's illogical. And no matter how you want to try to fathom and explain the Trinity, you can never get out of this bind. You are debilitating God. You are humiliating God. You are lowering God. And you're the same one saying that nothing is impossible for God. So you're saying it's possible for God to be other than God. Your belief needs to be adjusted and fixed. And the day of December 25th, first and foremost, when you read the biblical context, we know that Jesus was not born in December because in Palestine, in December is cold. And according to the biblical testimony, that the date palms was ripening, and this is not December weather in Palestine. So even contextually from the Bible, it doesn't add up. Second of all, even if you accept that Jesus Himself, alayhi salam, was born on December 25th, that's your business to accept that. That's Jesus, the human being, a man. Don't equate or elevate a human being, a man, to be on par with God. This is what God has warned from the beginning of time. This is what Jesus warned from. How do you come now, 2020-some years later, making this man to be a deity when He served His whole life trying to tell you that God is one, and He prayed to God, He worshiped God, and He called you to God. And instead of going to God, you go to Him and attribute to Him qualities that's not befitting for Him, but belong to God alone. So I have a channel which we deal with all of this, if I may. The channel Radush Shubuhat, it's on YouTube, RADUSH, Radush Shubuhat, SHUBUHAAT. It's an Arabic expression. It means refuting the doubts. It's a rebuttal to the doubtful matters that comes. So we take the things that people say against Islam that's doubtful to Muslims and non-Muslims. We refute them. We bring you the truth, and we hope that this sitting with my dear brother Sheikh Yusuf Ismail would allow you to visit our channel and learn more about us. But please support Brother Yusuf in his work there in South Africa and the work that he's doing there and beyond the confines of that country. So.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Aqil. That's been a fantastic, I think we're almost 2 hours there. For those who don't know, Brother Aqil, Sheikh Aqil Onque is from New York City, and his YouTube channel is indeed Raddu Shubahat, an excellent platform on YouTube refuting the doubts. But we've come to the end of our phenomenal session this evening. This is a special on unpacking Islamophobia, and we've had I'm not gonna even attempt to summarize the discussion I've had with Sheikh Aqil. It's been fascinating for me. I've learned so much. I'm sure all of you have learned. Join us tomorrow evening for our next segment with the Quranic translator, Dr. Safi Kaskas. Until then, this is Yusuf Ismail on behalf of ITV. Assalamu alaikum. And if you've been listening to us on the other channels, on CII, that's Channel Islam International, on Salam Media, and certainly on the Suk Islam YouTube channel. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you. And if you're traveling, have a safe journey.